series where Ruthless Mafia king is forced to marry him. This is part 6 of this series. Watch previous parts before if you haven't. Mine resting in her hospital bed, weak but managing a gentle smile for Tay, who's sitting beside her with wide, trusting eyes. Jimin and Jungkook have just returned from speaking to the police commissioner. Jimin, hey buddy, let's go somewhere safe, alright? He said softly. They looked up at Jimin, then back to Wine, confusion flickering in his eyes. Did they find his parents, Jimin? She asked, noticing the hesitation of Tay. Yes, Jimin said. Not yet. The commissioner said he hasn't received any missing child report. But we can leave Tay with the police for now. They'll take care of him until his families come forward. Mine's face falls, her gaze drifting back to Tay. Over the last few hours, little boy had become a comforting presence in her life, offering her a sense of companionship she did long for. Tay seemed to sense her sadness. I don't want to go, he murmured, barely audible for anyone. Why don't you want to go, buddy? The officer will keep you safe, he asked, leaning down, trying to make sense of Tay's quiet words. Jungkook absorbs the scene from the corner of the room, his expressions unreadable as he watches the boy's attachment to Wine. What if the bad man come back? I don't want to go without you, he whispered, clutching Wine's hand. Wine's heart ached as she wrapped a protective arm around him, sensing the fear in his voice. Wine. Nothing bad will happen, Tay. The police will protect you. I don't want to leave you, Nuna. I am safe here with you, he said, shaking his head, his voice trembling. Wine glances at Jimin with pleading eyes, feeling conflicted herself. Can't he stay with us just until they find his parents? She asked softly. Jimin sighs, looking between Wine and Jungkook. He gives a small sympathetic smile, sensing her attachment to the boy. Well, that's not up to me, he said with a gentle note, glancing at Jungkook. Wine turned her gaze to Jungkook, her voice softer than usual. She struggles to find the courage to ask. Please, he's just a child, Jungkook, she asked hesitantly. Jungkook meets her eyes, seeing the silent plea in them. Something shifts within him as he studied her, and without a word, he turns and exits the room. Vian's face falls, assuming his silence is a rejection. She looked down, her hand gently stroking his hair as he clings to her, his face clear. I'll go talk to him, don't worry, he said, placing a reassuring hand on Vian's shoulder. Jimin exits, following Jungkook out of the room. In the hallway, he finds Jungkook already talking on the phone with Commissioner, speaking in low, determined voice. If it's possible, I did like the child to stay with us, at least until we can locate his family. Hearing this, Jimin smiles to himself, feeling a warmth as he watches his friend's wall beginning to crack, even if Jungkook won't admit it to himself yet. Time skips. In the dim light hotel room, Vine laid propped up on soft pillows, her bandages concealed beneath the cozy blanket. Jungkook had insisted on moving her from the hospital to his private secured suite the moment she was stable. Hospitals were too vulnerable, he reasoned. Any of his enemies could easily track her there, and he refused to take any chances. The thought of her being hurt again by any man was enough to make his blood run cold. Though her body ached from the injuries, a warm smile spread across her face as she gently ruffled the hair of the little boy beside her. They was all giggles and endless chatter, his eyes sparkling with innocent joy as he clung to her. Did you know, Nuna? They said excitedly, holding her hand tightly. I learned to tie my own shoelace all by myself. That's amazing, Tay, Vine replied, lightly pinching his cheek. You are becoming such a big boy. They beamed, hugging her even tighter, careful not to press against her injuries. In his own way, he understood she was feral and made sure his every movement was gentle. Across the room, Jungkook sat on the couch, his laptop open but untouched. He told himself he was working, but his focus kept drifting back to wine and tea. Something was about the warmth between them. The joy in Wine's eyes made his chest tighten. As he watched, they grew more clingy, curling up beside Wine and holding tightly onto her hand. An uneasy feeling started creeping in. Why does she look so happy with him? He wondered. Wine smiled, her tenderness, her laugh, it was all directed to Tay, and for a reason he couldn't name. He resented it. Thay's laugh rang out again as Vine stroked his hair and pressed a quick, affectionate kiss to his cheek, causing the boy to blush and giggle. At that moment, Jungkook's hand twisted, and an involuntary no escaped from his lips, sharper than intended. Both Vine and Tay froze, looking over at him with wide eyes. Tay's little finger tightened around Vine's hand in a sudden fear while she looked at Jungkook, startled by the abrupt outburst. Realizing how his outburst must have sounded, Jungkook felt a hot wave of embarrassment wash over him. He cleared his throat, averting his gaze as he pretended to be absorbed in his laptop. He reached for his phone, bringing it up to his ear in an attempt to play it off as a misunderstanding. This isn't jealousy, he tried to tell himself. Why would he be jealous of a 5-year-old? Vine glanced at Tay, whispering, "It's okay, Tay, I think he's just busy." Seemingly reassured, Tay nodded, relaxing back into their conversation. But Jungkook's mind couldn't let go. He tried to convince himself he didn't care, that he had no reason to feel this way. But a voice inside won't quiet down. Why is she looking at him like that? As Wine brushed Tay's hair back, laughing again, Jungkook couldn't help but feel his chest tighten with irritation. He sighed heavily, his gaze hardening. What does it matter? He thought. I doesn't even consider her as my wife. He clenched his jaw. She's just here because she has to be. But despite his attempt to brush it off, the image of Wine smiling, her gentle laugh filled the room, lingering in his mind, making him question everything he thought he believed about love, jealousy, and the barrier he had built around his heart. Next morning, a soft knock on the door woke Wine. She opened her eyes to find Jungkook standing by her bed, his expression unreadable. They were still asleep beside her, curled up in a peaceful slumber. They have found his family, Jungkook informed her in a low voice, careful not to wake the boy. The commissioner says they can take him home now. A faint sadness flickered across Vine's face as she looked down at Tay, gently brushing his hair back when he finally stripped away. She managed a soft, warm smile despite the melancholy in her eyes. "Time to go, Tay," she whispered, her voice tinged with affection and sorrow. Tay blinked sleepily, sitting up and clutching her hand, a hint of fear in his young eyes. "Will I see you again, Nona?" Vine leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she whispered, her voice soft. "Be a good boy." The boy nodded, giving her one last hug before stepping back. As he left the room, Jungkook stared. Vine watched him go, her heart heavy. Jungkook absorbed her from a distance, a strange itch in his own chest. He knew this marriage was meant to be nothing but a transaction, but the sight of Vine's gentle sadness and warmth stirred something he couldn't understand, a quiet reminder that perhaps He was holding on more than he intended to admit. Time skips. It was now 2 weeks after the incident, and Vine had now fully recovered. As she sat on the bed packing her things for her return to home, she found herself thinking back on everything that had happened. Her thoughts drifted to Jungkook and the strange, unexpected ways he had shown he cared. Even if he tried to hide it behind his cold demeanor, every time he did told her to stay in bed, even in his firm, almost gruff tone, she could sense a genuine concern. She hadn't accepted this softer side of him, and surprisingly, she was growing attached to it. Suddenly, she remembered what happened 2 days before while Jungkook was busy on call, and she had decided to quietly slip into the washroom, not wanted to disturb him. As she stood in, she froze, eyes widening at the sight of a mouse scrolling across the floor. A scream escaped her before she could stop herself. No! Vine perched on the bathroom shelf, clutching onto it tightly. Jungkook rushed in, scanning the space for any threats. His intense expression quickly shifted to one of confusion when he saw her standing there, eyes wide and clearly panicked. "What are you doing up there?" he asked, frowning as he lowered his, genuinely puzzled. Vine pointed shakily towards the door. "There's a mouse," she managed to say, her voice trembling. Jungkook's brow frowned as he tried to process her words. "A mouse," he repeated, sounded almost dumbfounded. He blinked, trying to understand why she looked so terrified. His shoulders relaxed and a flicker of disbelief crossed his face as he stood there, momentarily frozen, struggling to grasp that this was the reason for her scream. Seeing him stare blankly, she scowled, arm crossed in frustration. "Yes, and it's huge, and you are just standing there not helping." Her face flushed with irritation. She looked at him expectantly. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head as if trying to clear his disbelief. "You are a grown woman, Vine," he muttered, eyebrows raised. "Why are you scared of a little mouse?" "It's not little," she argued, her voice rising. "It's huge, and you are still not helping." Trying to suppress a laugh, Jungkook sighed and softened his expression, looking at her with a faint amusement. "Fine," he said. "Nothing's going to happen to you. Just come down. I'll call the staff and they'll take the mouse away." He extended his hand. "Come down and let's go to the other room. There's no reason to be this afraid. I'm here with you. Nothing will happen." But Vine shook her head, clutching the shelf tighter. "No, what if it bites me?" She widened her eyes in horror, looking at him as if he were missing the point. "I'm not coming down until the mouse is gone." Jungkook blinked, stunned by her words. He stared at her, wondering if she was serious. The idea that she thought a tiny mouse could somehow bite her left him momentarily speechless, and he couldn't help but wonder if she was secretly a child at heart. After a few moments of her refusing to budge, he shook his head, clearly resigned, and moved toward her. "All right," he muttered under his breath, and deciding there was no use arguing. Without another word and warning, he reached up, wrapping his arms around her and lifting her up from the shelf. She gasped, caught off guard, her words momentarily lost as she stared at him in surprise. For a moment, she forgot all about the mouse, her eyes wide, focused on him instead. Jungkook set her down on the bed, crossed arms as he stood in front of her. "Sit," he instructed, his voice cool and controlled. "I'll call the staff to get rid of the mouse. Yes, you are safe now." She gave a small nod, cheeks slightly flushed, finally feeling the tension melt away. Smiling to herself, she realized that Even though he didn't say it directly, his actions had shown he cared, and she found herself liking this protective side of his more than she expected. But for now, she felt a pang of disappointment as this strange, unexpected time with Jungkook was came to an end. She was lost in her thoughts when Jungkook entered the room and asked in a cold voice, "Are you done packing?" Wine flinched, hearing his voice suddenly.
Good. Check one more time. We will leave in 5 to 10 minutes. His tone was sharp yet indifferent. Yes, I have already gone through everything. We won't leave anything behind, she replied softly. Jungkook only hummed in acknowledgement and moved aside as his phone buzzed. He picked up the call, his tone colder than ever. Meanwhile, Vine waited quietly, watching him handle the phone with his usual authority. While waiting for him to finish the call, a sudden knock at the door drew her attention. She glanced at Jungkook, who was engaged in his conversation, and decided to check the door herself. At first, she assumed it to be Jimin coming to call them. Without a second thought, she opened the door. However, it wasn't Jimin standing there, it was an unfamiliar man. The man dressed sharply, bowed slightly, and looked at her. Vine, confused but politely, bowed back and asked questioning, "Yes, who are you and what are you doing here?" The man straightened up and introduced himself. "My name is Ryan and I have been sent on behalf of Mr. Lupin. I would like to meet Mr. John." She tilted her head in confusion. The name Mr. Lupin was entirely foreign to her. She hadn't heard Jungkook mention him even once. Still, she quickly realized that the man must be referring to Jungkook as Mr. Jim. "He's bit busy at the moment," she replied cautionally. "I am his wife. If there's anything important, you can tell me and I'll deliver the message." He hesitated briefly, then bowed again. "Good morning, ma'am. Mr. Lupin has sent me to invite you and Mr. John for dinner at his residence tonight. I am here to deliver the invitation card." Meanwhile, as Jungkook ended his call, his sharp eyes darted around the room, noticing that Vine, who had gone to check the door, had not returned. Frowning, he slipped his phone into his pocket and strode toward the door. His instinct flared when he caught the sight of man standing at the doorway, reaching into his coat pocket. Jungkook's expression darkened, his eyes narrowed as he immediately assumed the worst. Without a second's delay, he pulled out and began striding toward them with his swift, silent steps. When he reached the door, he grabbed by an arm and yanked her behind him protectively, shielding her with his body. His other hand pointed directly at the man's head. "Hands up," Jungkook growled in a dangerously cold voice. "Who sent you here?" The sudden shift in energy left both Vine and Ryan frozen. The man's eyes widened in fear and Vine gasped softly, her heart pounding as she tried to process what was happening. My name is Ryan," the man stammered. "I was sent here by Mr. Don't move," Jungkook shouted sharply as Ryan instinctively lowered his hand toward his pocket. The delivery man flinched, raising his hand again in panic. Swift trickled down Ryan's forehead and Vine stood behind Jungkook, trembling in fear. Memories of her recent kidnapping flooded in her mind. For a moment, she felt like she was reliving the trauma. Gathering her courage, she took a hesitant step forward, lightly touching Jungkook's arm. I think he's here to deliver something from Mr. Lupin," she said softly, her voice trembling. Jungkook's head snapped toward her, his sharp gaze meeting hers. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice low but laced with disbelief. I said he's here from Mr. Lupin," she repeated, flinching slightly at his intense tone. Turning his attention back to Ryan, Jungkook glared at him suspiciously. "You have 5 seconds to explain yourself," he ordered, still aimed at his head. Ryan's hand trembled as he reached into his coat pocket. "It's just an invitation," he shuddered, pulling out an envelope. Jungkook carefully took the invitation card with his free hand, never letting his guard down. He inspected it thoroughly before lowering his weapon. though his expression remained dark. The invitation was intended from Mr. Lukin, requested their presence at their dinner party. However, Jungkook's mind raced with questions. Jane let out a shaky breath as Jungkook signaled for him to leave. Without wasting a second, the man bowed hesitantly and darted away. Jungkook turned back to Vine, his jaw clenched. "What were you thinking, opening the door for a stranger?" he demanded angrily. I didn't know. You didn't know? He cut her off, his voice raising. "Do you have any idea how dangerous it could have been? What if he was one of my enemies?" Vine's eyes filled with tears as she looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jungkook sighed, rubbing his temple in frustration. Without saying another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with a heavy heart. Jungkook paced through the hallway to hotel rooftop, the invitation card from Lukin clutched tightly in his hand. His face was unreadable, but his eyes reflected a storm of emotion, confusion, frustration, and suspicion. Lukin, the most mysterious figure in the mafia world, had invited not only Jungkook but also Vine to his residence for dinner. No one has ever seen Lukin's face or discovered his true identity, yet his power was undeniable and his influence reached every corner of the world. "Why now?" Jungkook muttered under his breath. "First he cancels the meeting and now this dinner invitation. Is it a trap, a flaw, or something else entirely?" His mind was a chaotic mess of thoughts. He was frustrated by all the things now and because of that only shouted on Vine, not even though it wasn't her mistake entirely. Reaching upon the rooftop, Jungkook dialed his father's number, his jaw clenched as he waited for him to pick up. "Jungkook," his father's deep voice resonated through the phone. "What is it?" he asked. Jungkook explained the situation, detailing Lukin's invitation and his suspicions. "Why would he invite both Vine and me? It doesn't make sense. What if it's a trap?" His father listened carefully before responding. "Lukin is not someone to take lightly. If we want to meet you, there's a reason. This could be an opportunity for an alliance. Alliance or not, I don't trust him," Jungkook retorted. "I don't want to be involved in this. It can be make situation even worse." His father tone frowned. "You will go, Jungkook, both of you. But take precautions. Bring Jimin and the guards. Jimin will wait outside with backup ready to intervene if needed. If you want, lower your guard, but you will go." Jungkook clenched his fist, his frustration evident in his voice. "I don't like this." "You don't have to like it," his father said calmly. "You have to do it." After a long pause, Jungkook finally relented. "Fine," he muttered. "We will go," even though it was clearly noticeable he don't want to. Then Jungkook went to Jimin's room to tell him about what he discussed with his father. After explaining each and everything to him, Jungkook called one of his trusted guards into the room. "Get a dress for Vine," he ordered. "Something elegant but modest. Include everything she'll needed. Accessory, shoes, everything. Deliver it to her room." The guard nodded. "Understood, sir." Jungkook leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. His mind wandered to Vine. The situation was new to her. She had no experience navigating the dangerous world he lived in. The thought of her being unprepared only added to his frustration. Meanwhile, in her room, Vine sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly together. She couldn't shake the guilt weighing on her. "Only because of my carelessness I got kidnapped and was about to. But even after all this, I am still doing the same mistake." Jungkook was right. What if it was one of his enemies and he could have hurted me, or even worse, she thought. "It was my fault," she whispered to herself. "He is only trying to protect me and I keep making things harder for him." A sudden knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She stood up, assuming it was Jungkook, and opened the door hesitantly. Instead, she found one of Jungkook's guards standing there, holding a large large garment bag and a small box. The guard bowed slightly. Ma'am, these are from sir. He instructed me to inform you to be ready by 7 p.m. for dinner. Everything you needed is here. Vine nodded, taking the items from him. Thank you, she said softly. The guard bowed again and left. Closing the door, Vine unzipped the garment bag to reveal a stunning royal blue gown. It was elegant and simple, with just the right amount of detail to make her feel beautiful without being overly flashy. After 7, Vine was ready. She stood in front of the mirror, her heart pounding as she adjusted her gown. Her hair was styled simply and her makeup was minimal, highlighting her natural beauty. She was lost in the thought when the door opened and Jungkook stepped inside. Vine turned to see him, her breath catching at the side. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his hair styled neatly. This was the first time she had seen him looking so polished, so refined. Jungkook paused, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. The royal blue gown complemented her perfectly, and she looked radiant. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both lost in each other's presence. Both before Jungkook could respond, Jimin entered the room, breaking the moment. We are ready to leave, he said, glancing between the two of them. Jungkook cleared his thought, his cold demeanor returning. Let's go, he said curtly, turning toward the door. In a dimly lit office, a man swirled the wine in his glass, his expression unreadable as he stared at the crimson liquid. One of his closest confidant leaned back casually, breaking the silence. What are you really planning? None of this makes sense. The man merely smirked, his lips curling in a way that gave away nothing. Before he could respond, a knock interrupted him. A guard entered, bowing deeply. Boss, they are here. The room fell silent as the man placed the glass down, rising with an air of authority, his attention hidden behind a veil of mystery. I'm really sorry for not uploading anything from a long time, but that's due to my exams. And as only few of my exams are left now, I will try to upload next part as soon as possible. And I am also working on it currently. And don't forget to tell me your favorite part from the series. Like, share, and subscribe my channel. Thanks for watching.